Israeli media have reported that Hamas has intercepted 45 pickup trucks laden with weapons sent by Israel to competing clans in Gaza.
On Monday, world leaders met in Egypt to discuss what comes next for Gaza. But on the ground, the struggle to answer that question is ongoing.
Fighting has broken out between Hamas and other groups in the wake of last week's ceasefire. But Palestinian analyst Mohammed Shahada told us internal conflict is just part of the story, as Israel has had a direct hand in stirring up gang violence.
Israel gathered them together. It's not that those gangs were formed organically. It is the Shin Bet, it's the IDF that contacts those criminals and grouped them together. This has been happening under the radar since Israel invaded Rafah in May 2024. That's when they first began to form the Abu Shabab gang. And then they started to form other gangs in recent months. Rami Hillis, Hussam al-Astal, Ashraf al-Mansi, all of those emerged around July, August. So what you have here is Israel grouping together criminals with a promise of another chance and a promise of power that they're going to be the ones running Gaza, as well as luxuries and privileges that the rest of Gaza are deprived of. Since the IDF cannot now invade 42% of Gaza, where they withdrew from, they are planning to use the gangs for precisely that reason. To try to grow the ranks of those militias up and try to use them to destabilize Gaza as much as possible, start a civil war basically, trying to create chaos through their own proxies, collaborators, criminal gangs, etc., and trying to trump it up to make it sound like there's a purge, there's a bloodbath, that Hamas is out of control, to try to manufacture a pretext for resuming the genocide again.
In a bid to re-establish authority over post-war Gaza, Hamas has set up checkpoints and street patrols, sought to disarm other groups, and even carried out public executions of those it accuses of looting throughout the war or collaborating with Israel's military.
One of them was to immediately restore civic order, the rule of law. The other one was to bring down prices in markets, all of those black markets where aid is being resold by cartels and gangs, etc. Another one was to make cash available, because it's been a big problem throughout the genocide that cash fell into the hands of mainly collaborators with Israel, otherwise cartels, big merchants, etc., that have monopolized it, and they've been asking for commissions of up to 55% per cash withdrawal. It was insane. Another one was basically to go after collaborators, gangs, etc. And the last element, and the most important one, is to disarm clans, big families, gangs, militias throughout the Gaza Strip. Throughout the genocide, Israel would kill Hamas militants, and then they would confiscate the heaviest weaponry, so for example rockets, but they would leave the light weapons, the rifles, the pistols, etc., and those would be collected deliberately. That is the Israeli strategy, is for those weapons to be collected by families, by clans, criminals, gangs, cartels, etc. So now Hamas set off on a mission to take away those weapons again. You had a huge number of those criminal elements that were trying to set up checkpoints throughout Gaza. They would stop people, take away their belongings. A lot of the times they would just murder people to take what's in their pockets and their hands. Hamas gave a chance to a lot of those outlaws. They gave them warning, and a lot of them that refused to turn themselves in are basically being pursued by Hamas. It's a period of pure chaos. It's coming after Israel has done everything possible to engineer societal collapse in Gaza. Either you try as fast as possible to re-establish government infrastructure so that these things happen within the scope, the mandate of law, of the legal system, or you leave it up to chaos. If Hamas doesn't launch a security campaign, you would have an immediate vacuum in Gaza that would be filled by the gangs, by the criminal elements. So that's the kind of situation that you have at hand, which is precisely why Trump said that he's Hamas's security campaign in Gaza.
Security is a major concern, but another one is leverage. As talks over Gaza's future continue, Hamas is eager to show it is still the main power broker in the Strip. Shahada says the group's message is clear, as phase 2 of the ceasefire is set to determine who will govern a future Gaza. The group will not be sidelined from the discussion.
Hamas is a political party as well as a militant group. They, of course, have political ambitions. It's not like they're going to be angels and say, okay, we're going to leave the picture. They are trying at the moment to accumulate as much leverage as possible to reassert themselves on the map, to reassert their influence and control, and saying to Israel, to the Americans, that Hamas cannot be sidelined, Hamas cannot be ignored.
Hamas's campaign has led to deadly clashes with other groups in Gaza. A confrontation with the Doghmash clan left over 30 people dead over the weekend. Videos of that campaign have prompted international criticism over a lack of due process. Yet the group's efforts to crack down on what it says are armed gangs has received support from unlikely quarters.
They do want to stop the problems, and they've been open about it, and we gave them approval for a period of time. You have close to 2 million people going back to buildings that have been demolished, and a lot of bad things can happen. So we want it to be safe. I think it's going to be fine. They did take out a couple of gangs that were very bad, very, very bad gangs, and they did take them out, and they killed a number of gang members. And that didn't bother me much, to be honest with you.
But despite this apparent support, Trump has threatened to violently disarm Hamas if it does not eventually lay down arms and hand over control to a new authority.
Hamas agreed to concede government from A to Z. That means all of it. They are still very much committed to handing over authority in Gaza to a technocratic administrative committee that would be a transitional entity until the Palestinian Authority is allowed to take over Gaza again and the Gaza and the West Bank are unified once more. The kind of influence that Hamas would retain would be the influence by virtue of its popularity, the popularity it accumulated with some segments of Palestinian society after the genocide, having withstood its grounds, as well as using sort of like power dynamics, consultation with other parties, mobilizing, advocating other parties, etc., as well as the elections that should happen within 12 months of the end of the genocide, in addition to Hamas joining the PLO.
So, in theory, elections should happen in Gaza. But how, when, and between whom remains uncertain.
Last time we were supposed to have elections in 2021, Hamas's popularity was very much down. They tried a lot of things, it remained down, but also Fatah's popularity as well. Palestine is one of the most youthful countries on earth, and the new generation rejects both factions, and they want to try something themselves. They want to be the leaders of their own fate. So Hamas and Fatah in 2021, both of them were polling about 20 to 24% of the popular vote, which means that both of them combined would have not managed to get a majority in parliament. So there would have been some sort of like power sharing dynamics going on. Now, after the genocide and after October 7th and after all of this, Hamas's popularity inside Gaza itself is way more diminished than before. I have to be honest about this. It's way lower than before. The destruction of this incredible magnitude, the death of this incredible magnitude, it's not an easy thing that people would let go. The average person in Gaza wants a new government that is neither Fatah nor Hamas. The average person in Gaza wants a fully independent technocratic government to basically not provide any pretext for Israel or its backers to maintain the siege on Gaza or to resume the genocide.
In the jostle for post-war influence, one of Gaza's most powerful gangs is Yasser Abu Shabab's Popular Forces.
Infamous for its looting of aid through Gaza's Kerem Abu Salam crossing during the war, the group is currently believed to be sheltering in Rafah under Israel's military control, although its exact whereabouts remain unknown.
An investigation by Sky News has revealed that the looting gang is being directly supplied by Israel. Earlier, I spoke to one of the reporters behind the exposé, Ben van der Merwe. He started by taking me through the basics. Who is Yasser Abu Shabab, and what is his group, the Popular Forces?
So we don't know very much about where he come from. He wasn't very well known before the war, inside Gaza or outside of Gaza. But what we do know is that he emerged sort of in the early stages of the war as a ringleader of sort of looting aid trucks in southern Gaza. Him and his gang controlled a sort of very important section of the aid route that pretty much all aid was going into Gaza at the time through Kerem Shalom. And in recent months, or since the January ceasefire, really, they've transitioned from just being a looting gang to being much more political and increasingly ambitious in terms of what they were trying to accomplish. So they're very stridently against Hamas. They claim affiliation with the Palestinian Authority, and they've been conducting sort of military operations against Hamas.
And whereabouts in Gaza do they have control? And what is the extent of the control that they have in Gaza?
So we've mapped out their compound in southern Gaza. It's to the east of Rafah, completely surrounded by fields of rubble on the one side and the Israeli Morag corridor on the other side, deep inside the Israeli area of control, we should say. It's quite a small area, around 500 by 500 meters, where they sort of live and where they have some civilians living with them. They have school, a mosque, a food store, medical tent, and they're really trying to set this up as like an alternative place for people to go to. But what's interesting is just like how different it looks from the rest of Gaza. Like you can see in these videos, they've got sort of new vehicles, they've got money, they've got cigarettes, which Israel's banned from entering Gaza. They've got ample supplies of food. So that's what really like piqued our interest in them in the first place.
Yeah, your team has spent months, I gather, investigating the group. You've examined footage from their base. You've interviewed a member of the group, as well as an IDF soldier stationed near their base, each of whom testify that Israel is directly supplying the group with support. What kind of support are we talking about here?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the group has access to weapons, but they also have access to brand new iPhones and vehicles. And one of the interesting things we found was a TikTok account, which we later learned is owned by a sort of a smuggler who lives in Israel, which would show videos of fancy cars in Israel, in Israeli roads with Israeli license plates, and then the same car later at Abu Shabab's camp in East Gaza. And what we found out from a senior commander in the group and from a serving IDF soldier at the Kerem Shalom crossing is that basically Israel is coordinating the entry of these supplies, helping them to smuggle in these supplies. The commander in the militia told us that basically what they do is when they want something to come into Gaza, they just get on the phone or on WhatsApp to this coordination room in the West Bank, which he says is run by the Palestinian Authority, and then they arrange the entry of these goods with Israel.
So is it just a case that Israel is sort of turning a blind eye to the entry of prohibited items for these groups? Well, it sounds like Israel is actively coordinating, or are there cases where Israel is even providing some of these items? You mentioned weapons, for example. Is it possible to establish whether Israel is directly providing weapons to this group or others like it?
That's where exactly the weapons come from is not something that we're able to tell. The group claimed that the weapons and the supplies in general come from sort of their fellow Bedouins in Egypt, in Israel, in Jordan. What we do know is that, well, what we do know is that basically Israel has on several occasions conducted airstrikes during military operations by this group. So I'll give you an example. On, I think it was 13th of April, or sometime in April of this year, the group were ambushed while searching a house sort of very near to their base. They were ambushed by Al-Qassam unit. And then what we can see in the satellite imagery, because we geolocated sort of where this attack took place, is within hours of the attack, by the next morning, the house had been completely flattened by an Israeli strike. We don't know if that took place during the operation or immediately afterwards. But there seems to have been some level of coordination.
Now, as well as Israeli government involvement and Israeli military involvement in the provisions and operations of this group, your investigation found that other governments may also be complying or be helping these groups. Which governments did you find to be implicated in this investigation?
So I should say, firstly, that the commander of the group named Jordan, Egypt, and the Palestinian Authority as being involved in this coordination of supplies entering Gaza. we contacted all those governments and they didn't respond to us. Israel also didn't respond to us. One interesting thing we found, though, was a car that had been taken into Gaza with a license plate from the UAE on it. And this had been pictured with the deputy commander of the group on 2 occasions. And we also found that the logo of their armed wing, the counterterrorism service, is pretty much identical to that used by militia backed by the UAE in Yemen. Again, we put these questions to the government of the UAE, didn't receive a response, but it is something that we're continuing to look into.
And from the analysts and the experts that you consulted about this investigation, can you shine any light on why Israel and or these other governments would be supplying a group like this that is known to have been looting aid within the Gaza Strip?
I mean, so we spoke to a few different experts about this, and basically what they all said is that this is a classic strategy of dividing and conquering. So making sure that no one group, namely Hamas, has total control over Gaza, has a monopoly of force, because the more divided Gaza is, the less of a danger it's thought to pose to Israel. We also know that Netanyahu has been a long-standing opponent of a Palestinian state, and this certainly could make that prospect less likely.
Okay, thank you. Now, as well as governments, your investigation found that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is also supporting this group, providing food to this group. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, just for context, is the US and Israeli-backed aid provider, which has drawn controversy over repeat shootings of Palestinians seeking aid at its site. How is the GHF supporting this looting gang, and what are the implications of this support?
So we found multiple videos of the food stores at this camp, and a lot of those videos showed boxes with the GHF logo. And crucially, some of them showed entire pallets of GHF aid, including with the original plastic wrapping around the pallets. And what that tells us is that these weren't just boxes that were bought on the black market or taken during chaotic looting attempts. These were delivered to the camp. We actually found a video showing a lorry, a forklift truck, and a GHF pallet all in a row. We put this to GHF and they told us, we do send aid to the camp. They said that true neutrality means that everyone in Gaza deserves to be fed, including people living in the area of this militia. But when we put that to aid experts, they said that this is a really serious violation of humanitarian principles, because as soon as you're sending aid directly to an armed group and not delivering it directly to the people, what you're doing, we were told, is hard to distinguish from supporting one side in an armed conflict.
Now, I know that the source you spoke to was pretty direct about the ambitions of the so-called popular forces in Gaza. What, in his words, are they trying to achieve here?
So the source that we were talking to, who's a childhood friend of Yasser Abu Shabab, the leader, and a senior commander in the group, he said they want to run everything. They want to basically be the future government of Gaza, or at least be an important part of that future government. So when we were talking to him, he was discussing reforms to the school curriculum. He was discussing holding a referendum on joining the Abraham Accords. So clearly their ambitions have grown a lot in the last few months, because a few months ago they were saying that their ambition was solely limited to providing security for aid trucks and to protecting people from Hamas attacks.
Now, Yasser Abu Shabab's group is not the only gang vying for control in the Gaza Strip. I believe that you have another investigation coming out today which takes the story and ties in some of the other groups present on the ground. Can you give us any insight into the findings of today's investigation?
Yeah, so Yasser Abu Shabab's group is just one of 4 that we know of which are active across the Gaza Strip from the north to the south. all of them, interestingly, are operating from within the zone that Israel still controls, so behind that yellow line to which IDF forces withdrew. The sole exception to that was a small militia apparently formed in the last few weeks as part of the Dogmush clan. I should say the clan has been sort of very forthright that they've rejected this group. They never had anything to do with it, but they said it was rogue elements within the clan. But as your viewers may have heard, there's been huge fighting in Gaza City as Hamas has sort of attempted to fight this clan, this militia, and has been accused of sort of fighting the family more broadly.
Ben van der Merwe, that's all that we have time for today, but thank you so much for sharing your findings with everyone at Middle East Eye.
Thank you.
That was Ben van der Merwe, who is a Sky News investigative journalist, and he was taking us there through an investigation showing that Israel is directly supporting one of the gangs that has been known for looting aid and that has been clashing with Hamas this past week since the ceasefire. So for anyone just joining us, today on MEELive, we are asking who will be governing post-war Gaza. And one of the reasons that we are asking that is because of these scenes of violence that have emerged from the Strip, showing clashes between Hamas and other armed groups. Tamara Hamani is with me. Can you just sum up, what are these scenes of violence that have been coming out of Gaza? What's going on there?
Well, Hamas is currently on a publicly stated campaign to disarm other groups within the Strip and also to, as analyst Shada mentioned, to bring down prices. It's obviously doing so in an environment of chaos and disorder after 2 years of war. And so some of the videos that have emerged have really shocked the international community, where you basically see men lined up, kneeling, blindfolded, and basically members of, they call themselves Gaza security forces, but obviously presumably members of Hamas lined up behind them, basically shooting them. And it's kind of very public. You have big crowds in front of them watching. And it's obviously quite shocking to see that kind of thing online. It's provoked a lot of international criticism, saying kind of, where's the due process? How can you line people up in the street like this? And kind of the arguments have begun that kind of Hamas is still intact and it's cracking down on opponents and it's reasserting its control over the Strip, basically. And then you have another strand of argument from people on the ground in Gaza who say, you know what? After a war, the most valuable commodity to people is security, is order, is not to be, at the victim of gangs who loot and who cause huge increase in prices on black markets and such, and who want a semblance of order in their lives after 2 years of war. Now, it can very clearly be two things at once. One element of this is that those who looted and resold aid at a huge markup during the war are extremely resented among society, because while most people couldn't eat and couldn't afford to even buy flour, let alone more kind of luxury items that would be considered, fruit and vegetables and meat and so on, there is a real resentment towards actors who were seen to be profiteering, who were seen to be benefiting in these times of scarcity. At the same time, Hamas is not just acting in its capacity as a military or a governing organization. It's a political party, and it's trying to send certain messages both to the people of Gaza, saying, look, we're still in control, we were victorious, we're still the best source of security, and, these other gangs are not as powerful as us, not as capable as us, and we're still the de facto authority. It's trying to signal that to Gaza's population after 2 years of war. The second thing I would say is probably a message to the international community. So we're at the moment in the beginning of phase 2 of the ceasefire talks. We're looking at what kind of technocratic committee could be in charge of Gaza. And it's a message to the world that we're still a player here. We're still a player behind the scenes. Even if we can't directly inhabit that committee, we still want influence. For example, they recently submitted, alongside other Palestinian factions, a list of 41 names of people who they think could be part of that committee. And they're obviously waiting for the PA, which is the ruling body in the West Bank, the occupied West Bank, to respond, and for Israel to respond. So they're still trying to say, we will be a player behind the scenes. We still are the de facto authority on the ground. And so you need to incorporate us into the conversation for what comes next in Gaza. So again, there's multiple motivations going on at once with this campaign. I think, like you said, in international criticism at these scenes has been strong. But then when you look at the context in terms of some of the popular anger and resentment that those figures had fomented over the past 2 years, you understand what Hamas is trying to signal or trying to message with these very public scenes, which albeit seem, extremely disturbing to viewers from the outside.
Thank you for providing that context, because yes, I think a lot of people have seen these videos circulating, but of course there is a lot of context that needs to be understood. And it's not just about what is happening inside Gaza as well. As we have just heard from our guests on this show, we spoke to Palestinian analyst Mohammed Shahada, and we just spoke to Sky investigative reporter Ben van der Merwe. We hear that actually there's a lot of external forces here as well, namely Israel. Israel's government and Israel's army has been directly supporting some of these armed groups, helping them get access to weapons, to illegal contraband that has made them enormous amounts of money. And it's not just Israel's government, other governments have been implicated, and aid groups. Well, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the US-Israeli-backed aid group. So all of this paints these scenes in quite a different light. And we can take a look at what some of the experts have been saying given this additional context. We've rounded up a few of these. One legal expert actually speaking to Sky for this investigation said that these are classic tactics of divide and conquer, intended by Israel to maintain control of the occupied territory even after officially withdrawing. Another pointed out very similar tactics here between Israel's clan tactics today and their history of providing support to Hamas when they were seeking to undermine Hamas's secular rival Fatah. Palestinians from Gaza have also called this a way of Israel continuing warfare against Gaza behind the guise of a ceasefire. So seeds of chaos can be sown internally, but they have the same effect of collapsing security and of collapsing governance in Gaza as bombing does. And finally, anti-colonial academics warn that the resulting scenes of chaos we've seen unfolding on social media, these may be intended to serve the colonial myth that Palestinians are incapable of self-rule. But if this is Israel's strategy, it may also be backfiring, as we've had news today that Hamas has seized control of around 45 trucks carrying weapons, as well as other provisions intended by Israel for competing clans. So really, this warfare of entropy, if that is what we're seeing, is sowing seeds of chaos that even Israel cannot control.
Yeah, I mean, the problem, and Israeli military sources who spoke about this to local media pointed this out at the time, is when you send weapons to Gaza, you don't know where they might end up. You don't know who might get hold of them. It's a highly dangerous and delicate endeavor. And even, many Israelis were shocked when Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu first came out and said I think it was around June, that, yeah, we're backing the popular forces, we're sending them weapons, and so what? They oppose Hamas. And people were quite shocked that it seemed like, okay, this, former drug trafficker who is only out and about because he escaped from prison after October 7th when the war started, is being armed and funded by us without a particular thought to the aftermath or what could occur. And again, again, you mentioned, a lot of people pointed back to, well, weren't you also the same prime minister who was bragging about sending money to Hamas before the war because it was the best way to prevent a Palestinian state by keeping the Palestinian political parties divided? So we're now seeing the same thing where Israelis are questioning, hang on, are we sure we just want to throw money and weapons at anyone who's not Hamas? First of all, because they themselves may be a bad faith actor. But second of all, because, again, you have no idea in the chaos of war and now of this early initial stages of the ceasefire where those weapons could end up. We've had a flurry of maybe a dozen new militias being formed in recent weeks. Mohammed Shahada mentioned, but, you have Hussam al-Astal's group south of Khan Yunis. You have groups in Beit Lahia, Beit Hanun in the north. You have the Dogmish clan in the Gaza Strip, all of whom are armed. And there doesn't really seem to be an understanding of how to monopolize those weapons under one authority, which authority that should be, really how to, reel back in the disorder of the past 2 years as Israel has, targeted civil police officers, governing infrastructure, and so on. Such a totalistic war on a territory needs to be replaced by a new method of governing, of order. Otherwise, you're creating very fertile conditions for the party that you have been combating and claiming to destroy simply to reemerge and claim, well, actually, you know what? We're the only ones that can provide security. Everyone who opposes us is a collaborator with Israel, whether that's true or not. Everyone that opposes us is actually a criminal and is in cahoots with Netanyahu. So, we're the only authority that can restore order. And what Shahada was saying was that if you're, even, no matter how unpopular, no matter how autocratic you are as a governing body, if people have to choose between that and chaos, they will. So I think this is, this is the risk by not having a strategy for the day after, a long-term plan, because, Israel doesn't consider it its domain what happens to Palestinians in Gaza. At one point it talked about expelling them. At one point it talked about voluntary migration. Because they were never concerned with what the day after looked like, you now have a situation where Hamas is able to emerge and say and claim that it's the best source of security. And it's very conscious of the fact that it needs to do so even more now that those gangs supported by Israel are trying to make their own claims, like Abu Shabab. So you're unfortunately in creating the very conditions of insecurity and competition and uncertainty that lead to demands for, or at least acceptance of, a group like Hamas to install its authority in whatever way possible, which is an extremely dangerous situation.
Right, and at the end of the line here are Palestinian people in Gaza who have endured 2 years of genocidal war, who are waiting to or have begun returning to their homes, and for whom peace remains a priority or a burning question. And that's important to remember. This is not just a game of power brokering.
Of course not. There are real lives at stake here who have undergone 2 years of destruction and have no idea if the war could restart tomorrow, if Israel could decide to resume its offensive. No idea where the new lines, the new boundaries are, and under whose authority they could fall under. So it's extremely important to remember who is at the heart of this and what the stakes are for them, which are undoubtedly the highest of all.
And on that note, we will wrap today's show, but please do send in your questions and your opinions. You can reach us across social media at Middle East Eye or email meelive@middleeasteye.org.
We will be here at 5 p.m. British Standard Time, which is noon in New York, every Tuesday and Thursday, bi-weekly.
See you then.